Sarah Carter Reynolds sat in her Austin home's kitchen, absent-mindedly scrolling through social media while her 7-month pregnancy made sitting anywhere comfortable a challenge. The morning sun streamed through windows she had personally selected when they bought this modest $2 million house 3 years ago. Derek had wanted something flashier, but Sarah convinced him this neighborhood felt more authentic, more real. She paused on Madison Blake's Instagram Live. The 26-year-old influencer was showing off her new apartment, her 2 million followers flooding the chat with heart-eye emojis and fire symbols. Sarah didn't particularly follow Madison, but the algorithm had been pushing her content lately. "And this is my bedroom setup," Madison giggled, panning her phone camera across an obviously expensive space. "I know you guys always ask about my skincare routine, so let me show you my vanity." Sarah was about to scroll past when something caught her eye. On Madison's nightstand sat a distinctive watch, a limited edition Patek Philippe that Derek had bought himself last Christmas. The same watch he claimed was too valuable to wear regularly. The chat exploded. Usernames she didn't recognize were typing rapidly. "Wait, is that Derek Reynolds' watch? OMG Madison, are you dating the tech guy? That's definitely Reynolds' digital CEO's watch. I saw him wear it at TechCrunch." Madison's face went pale as she read the comments. She quickly ended the live stream, but Sarah's hands were already shaking. Derek had been working late every night for the past 3 months. Conference calls that ran until midnight, weekend trips to potential client meetings. Sarah had been supportive, understanding that building a $15 million company required sacrifice. She walked to their bedroom and opened Derek's jewelry box, empty spot where the Patek Philippe should be. Her phone buzzed with a text from Derek. "Working late again tonight. Don't wait up. Love you." Sarah stared at the message, then at the empty watch box, then at her rounded belly where their daughter was kicking, as if sensing her mother's distress. She had given up her Wall Street career 3 years ago, claiming burnout from her investment banking job. In reality, she had wanted to escape the constant pressure of being Helen Carter's granddaughter, the weight of expectation that came with the Carter Steele legacy. She thought marrying Derek Reynolds, a self-made entrepreneur from humble beginnings, would give her the authentic love she craved. Now, sitting in their kitchen, she realized she might have traded one kind of performance for another. Her phone rang. Derek's name flashed on the screen. "Hey, babe." His voice was casual, confident. "Just wanted to check in. How are you feeling?" "I'm fine," Sarah managed. "How's your day going?" "Busy. You know how it is. The acquisition talks are heating up. I might need to fly to San Francisco tomorrow." "Derek," Sarah's voice caught. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, anything." "Are you happy in our marriage? I mean, are you happy with me?" The pause lasted 3 seconds too long. "Sarah, what kind of question is that? Of course I'm happy. You're carrying our daughter. We have everything we've worked for." But his tone had shifted. The warmth was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost like impatience. "I just feel like we've been distant lately," Sarah continued, "like we're living parallel lives instead of building something together." Another pause. "Sarah, I think you're overthinking things. Pregnancy hormones can make you emotional. Maybe you should talk to Dr. Wright about this." The dismissiveness in his voice made Sarah's chest tighten. When had Derek started treating her concerns as symptoms to be managed rather than feelings to be understood? "You're probably right," she said quietly. "I'll call her." "Good. Listen, I really do have to go. This call with potential investors is crucial." After he hung up, Sarah sat in their kitchen for 20 minutes, feeling the baby move inside her and wondering when she had become so small in her own life. She picked up her phone and searched for Madison Blake's social media accounts. The influencer's content was polished, aspirational, photos from expensive restaurants Sarah recognized but had never been to with Derek, designer clothes that cost more than Sarah's monthly allowance, a lifestyle that screamed ambition and success. Everything Derek claimed he wanted in a partner. Everything Sarah had stopped being when she chose love over legacy. That night, Sarah lay awake listening to Derek's key in the front door at 2 a.m. He slipped into bed without waking her, smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't hers. She stared at the ceiling, one hand on her belly, and wondered if choosing authenticity over advantage had been the biggest mistake of her life. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday morning via certified mail. Sarah signed for them while still in her pajamas, the delivery man looking uncomfortable as he noted her obviously pregnant state. Derek had already left for work, claiming an early breakfast meeting with investors. Sarah opened the envelope with trembling hands, scanning legal language that reduced 5 years of marriage to asset division and custody arrangements. Her phone rang immediately. Derek's ringtone. "Sarah, I need you to know this isn't personal." His voice was crisp, professional. "My attorney advised serving you formally to avoid any confusion about timelines." "Timeline for what?" Sarah's voice barely worked. "For our divorce. I thought it was obvious where this was heading." Sarah sank into their kitchen chair, the papers scattered across the table. "Derek, I'm 7 months pregnant with your daughter." "I know that. That's why we need to establish custody arrangements early. 50-50 split? Supervised visits initially given your emotional state?" "My emotional state?" The words came out sharp. "Sarah, let's be honest. You've been paranoid about my work schedule, questioning my commitment, creating drama where none exists. I need a partner who understands my ambitions, not someone who makes me feel guilty for pursuing success." Sarah felt something break inside her chest. Someone like Madison Blake, the silence stretched between them. "I don't know what you mean," Derek finally said. "I saw your watch on her nightstand during her Instagram live yesterday. The Patek Philippe you claimed was too valuable to wear." "Sarah, this is exactly what I'm talking about. You're stalking social media accounts, building conspiracy theories. This paranoia isn't healthy." The casual cruelty of his response hit her like a physical blow. "Paranoia. Derek, you've been lying to me for months. I've been building our future. But apparently, your version of our future involves me staying home every night, limiting my networking opportunities, treating my business like a hobby instead of the empire I'm creating." "Empire." Sarah's voice climbed. "Derek, you employ 50 people. You're successful, but you're not building an empire." "This is exactly the problem. Sarah, you don't see my potential. You don't understand what I'm capable of achieving. Madison gets it. She understands the entertainment industry, the networking requirements, the pressure of building something extraordinary." The name confirmation felt like a knife twist. "So you are having an affair." "I'm exploring my options with someone who shares my vision, someone who wants to build a power couple brand instead of hiding from success." Sarah stared at the man she had married, searching for any trace of the person who had once held her during thunderstorms and brought her soup when she was sick. "What about our daughter?" "She'll be provided for. My attorney has already calculated appropriate child support based on your financial needs. You'll be comfortable, Sarah. More comfortable than you have any right to expect given your contribution to our assets." The words landed like slaps. "My contribution." Let's be realistic. You worked part-time at an art gallery making $30,000 a year. I built Reynolds Digital from nothing. Everything we have, I created. Sarah felt their daughter kick against her ribs as if protesting her father's words. I supported you, Derek. I believed in you when no one else would. Support doesn't pay for houses or cars, or the lifestyle you've enjoyed for 3 years. I need a partner who brings something to the table besides emotional labor. After Derek hung up, Sarah sat alone in their kitchen, surrounded by divorce papers and the remnants of a life she thought she understood. She thought about the phone call she had avoided making for 5 years, the number she had memorized but never dialed, the conversation she had promised herself she would never need to have. But as she looked at the legal documents that reduced their marriage to a financial transaction, Sarah realized her time of hiding might be over. Her grandmother, Helen Carter, had built Carter Steel into a $2.8 billion empire through intelligence, ruthlessness, and the understanding that in this world, people like Derek Reynolds were predators. Sarah had spent 3 years trying to be prey. Maybe it was time to remember she was born to be something else entirely. She picked up her phone and dialed the number she had carried in her memory like a secret weapon for 5 years. Carter Steel Industries, Helen Carter's office. Patricia, it's Sarah, she said quietly. I need to speak with my grandmother. 3 days later, Sarah sat across from Derek in the offices of Henderson and Associates, Austin's most prestigious family law firm. She had hired them with her personal savings, feeling empowered for the first time since receiving the divorce papers. Her attorney, Patricia Henderson, was a sharp woman in her 50s who specialized in high-asset divorces. She had reviewed the prenuptial agreement and found several potential weaknesses. The prenup is standard, but not airtight. Patricia had explained, we can challenge the fairness of the asset division, especially given your pregnancy and the length of the marriage. Sarah felt hopeful. Derek's $15 million company represented 5 years of growth during their marriage. Even with the prenup, she should be entitled to something substantial. Derek arrived with his legal team 3 attorneys in expensive suits who treated the conference room like a courtroom they had already won. Sarah. Derek nodded curtly. He had lost weight since their last conversation, his face drawn with stress. I hope we can resolve this quickly. That depends on your definition of fair, Patricia replied. My client contributed significantly to the emotional and logistical support that enabled Mr. Reynolds to build his business. Derek's lead attorney, Marcus Webb, smiled with practiced condescension. Ms. Henderson, emotional support doesn't constitute a financial contribution. Mrs. Reynolds worked part-time, making $30,000 annually, while benefiting from a lifestyle funded entirely by my client's entrepreneurial success. She also managed the household, handled all personal affairs, and provided the stability that allowed Mr. Reynolds to focus exclusively on his business. Patricia countered, which brings us to our primary concern. Marcus opened a thick folder. We've conducted a thorough review of Mrs. Reynolds' spending patterns during the marriage. The evidence suggests significant financial irresponsibility. Sarah felt her stomach drop. Marcus spread documents across the table. $20,000 donated to various charities without consulting her husband. $15,000 spent on artwork for their home. $8,000 on what appear to be impulsive shopping trips. A pattern of spending that suggests poor judgment and potential financial instability. Sarah stared at the papers. Every charitable donation she had made in small amounts over 3 years. Every piece of art she had carefully selected for their home. Every purchase twisted into evidence of inadequacy. These are reasonable expenses for a household with their income level, Patricia protested. Are they? Marcus pulled out more documents. We also have evidence of Mrs. Reynolds attempting to hide assets. What assets? Sarah's voice cracked. Bank accounts in your maiden name. Investment portfolios your husband was never informed about. A pattern of financial secrecy that suggests premeditation for this divorce. Sarah felt the room spinning. The accounts Marcus referenced were small emergency funds she had maintained from her Wall Street days. Money she had forgotten about, never accessed, never used. "These are dormant accounts with minimal balances," Patricia said, but her voice lacked confidence. "They represent a pattern of deception," Marcus replied. "Combined with Mrs. Reynolds' emotional instability, paranoid accusations about Mr. Reynolds' work relationships, and apparent inability to manage household finances responsibly, we believe the prenuptial agreement should be enforced in full." 2 hours later, Sarah walked out of the law offices feeling completely destroyed. The judge had sided with Derek's team, ruling that the prenup was valid and that Sarah's claims of unfair asset division were without merit. She would receive minimal spousal support, temporary housing assistance, and child support calculated at the lowest possible legal threshold. Derek waited by her car in the parking garage. "Sarah, I want you to know this wasn't personal," he said, "but I had to protect myself and my business." "Protect yourself from what, Derek?" "From me. From the woman who loved you enough to give up everything." "You didn't give up everything. Sarah, you gave up a job you hated to live a comfortable life funded by my success. There's a difference." The casualness of his dismissal made Sarah feel physically sick. "I supported you when you had nothing but an idea and a garage workspace. I believed in you when investors were rejecting your proposals. I made this marriage a safe space for you to take risks. And I'm grateful for that support. But support doesn't entitle you to half of what I built." Sarah looked at the man she had married, recognizing nothing of the person she had fallen in love with. "Who are you, Derek? When did you become someone who could serve divorce papers to his pregnant wife and call it business?" "I became someone who understands that in this world, you either win or you lose. I refused to lose because I was too sentimental to make hard decisions." That night, Sarah sat in her temporary apartment, a modest place Derek's attorneys had deemed appropriate for her circumstances, and realized she had fundamentally misunderstood the game she was playing. She had thought marriage was about partnership, love, building a life together. Derek had seen it as a business arrangement with an exit strategy. But as she looked at the ultrasound photos on her kitchen table, Sarah remembered something her grandmother Helen had once told her: "In business, Sarah, the most dangerous opponents are the ones who underestimate you." Derek Reynolds thought he was divorcing a helpless pregnant woman with no resources and no options. He had no idea he had just declared war on a family that had been winning battles for over a century. The social media explosion happened overnight. Sarah woke up to 17 missed calls and hundreds of notifications. Madison Blake had posted an Instagram story announcing her engagement to Derek Reynolds, complete with professional photos and the ring Sarah had shown Derek in a magazine 2 years ago, the one he had claimed was too expensive for someone who doesn't work full-time. The caption read, "Sometimes you have to go through the wrong person to find your soulmate." Derek showed me what it means to build an empire together. Can't wait to be Mrs. Reynolds. Sarah's phone rang immediately. Her friend Riley Chen, a former colleague from her Wall Street days. "Sarah, honey, I just saw the news." "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Sarah lied, staring at the engagement photos on her phone screen. Madison wore a designer dress that cost more than Sarah's monthly allowance, posed in front of Derek's company headquarters like she was already the queen of his empire. "You're not fine. No one would be fine. Sarah, this is insane. He's been cheating on you while you're pregnant with his child." The comments on Madison's post were worse than the photos. Hundreds of followers congratulating the power couple and calling their love story inspiring. A few brave souls questioned the timeline, but they were quickly drowned out by Madison's loyal fans. "When's the wedding?" someone asked. "Soon." Madison had replied, "We don't want to wait when you know it's real love." Sarah spent the morning scrolling through social media, watching her life be rewritten in real time. Derek's business accounts reposted Madison's announcement. Industry publications picked up the story. Austin lifestyle blogs called them the couple to watch. No one mentioned Derek's pregnant ex-wife. By noon, Sarah realized her social circle had already chosen sides. Friends who had once claimed to love her were now conspicuously silent. The few who reached out offered hollow condolences that felt more like social obligation than genuine concern. Her friend Jessica texted, "I'm so sorry you're going through this. We all knew Derek was ambitious, but no one saw this coming." Sarah called her immediately. "What do you mean you all knew?" "Sarah, honey, Derek's been talking about feeling trapped for months. He said you were holding him back, that you didn't understand his vision. He was telling our friends I was holding him back. He said you wanted him to stay home more, that you were jealous of his success. We all thought it was just normal marriage stress." Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. "How long has he been talking about this?" "Maybe 6 months, Sarah. We thought you knew. We thought you were both working through things." After hanging up, Sarah realized Derek hadn't just planned his exit strategy. He had been systematically poisoning their mutual friends against her, building a narrative that painted her as the obstacle to his success. The divorce hearing was scheduled for the following week. Sarah met with Patricia Henderson to prepare. "I have to be honest with you, Sarah," Patricia said. "Derek's team has built a strong case. The financial documents, the witness statements about your behavior, the prenuptial agreement. It's going to be very difficult to challenge." "Witness statements about my behavior." Patricia opened a file. "Statements from friends saying you were paranoid about Derek's work schedule, that you demanded he prioritize family time over business opportunities, that you seemed unstable and possessive." Sarah stared at the documents. Every private conversation, every moment of vulnerability, every time she had confided her fears to friends, all of it had been twisted into evidence of her inadequacy. "They're painting a picture of a woman who was emotionally abusive and financially dependent," Patricia continued. "Combined with the prenup and Derek's documented financial contributions to the marriage, we're looking at minimal asset division." The hearing was a nightmare. Derek's attorneys presented their case with surgical precision. Character witnesses described Sarah as controlling and emotionally unstable. Financial experts testified that her part-time work contributed less than 5% to their household income. Sarah watched from the defendant's table as her 5-year marriage was reduced to a series of transactions and failures. The judge's ruling was swift and devastating. Sarah would receive $1,200 per month in temporary spousal support for 2 years, $1,500 in child support, and no claim to Derek's business assets. "The prenuptial agreement is clear and legally binding," the judge declared. "Mrs. Reynolds entered this marriage as a financially dependent party and will exit in the same status." That afternoon, Sarah sat in her car outside the courthouse, unable to stop shaking. She had lost everything: her marriage, her financial security, her social circle, and apparently her reputation. Her phone buzzed with a text from Derek. "I hope you understand this was never personal. I wish you the best. Sarah." She stared at the message, then at the engagement photos still trending on social media, then at her 7-month pregnant belly, where their daughter was kicking as if trying to comfort her mother. Sarah Carter Reynolds had spent 3 years trying to be small enough to fit into Derek's vision of an appropriate wife. She had given up her career, her family connections, her own identity to prove that love was more important than power. Now she understood why her grandmother Helen had always said that in business. Sentiment was a luxury only the powerful could afford. Derek Reynolds thought he had won. He thought he had successfully discarded a liability and upgraded to a partner who would enhance his brand rather than diminish it. But Derek had made one crucial miscalculation. Sarah Carter Reynolds wasn't just any discarded wife, she was a Carter. And the Carter family had built their empire by understanding that the most devastating attacks come from opponents who have nothing left to lose. Riley Chen appeared at Sarah's apartment the next morning carrying coffee and a laptop bag, her expression mixing sympathy with something that looked like professional excitement. "Sarah, we need to talk," Riley said, settling onto the couch beside her friend. "I've been doing some research since yesterday's hearing, and I think Derek made a serious mistake." Sarah looked up from her phone, where she had been doom-scrolling through more social media coverage of Derek and Madison's engagement. "What kind of mistake?" "The kind that could change everything." Riley opened her laptop. "Sarah, I'm a private investigator now. I left Wall Street 2 years ago to start my own firm. I specialize in corporate fraud cases." "Okay." Sarah wasn't sure where this was going. "One of my clients has been investigating irregularities in Austin tech companies. Derek's name came up in our research, which is why I was already familiar with his business practices." Riley pulled up a series of financial documents on her screen. "Sarah, Derek hasn't been entirely honest about Reynolds' digital success." "What do you mean?" "I mean his company is in serious financial trouble. The $15 million valuation he's been claiming, it's based on fraudulent reporting to potential investors." Sarah felt her stomach clench. "How do you know this?" "Because my client is one of the investors Derek approached 6 months ago. They hired me to verify his financial claims before committing to a funding round." Riley scrolled through spreadsheets and bank records. "Derek has been inflating revenue numbers, hiding debt, and using creative accounting to make Reynolds Digital appear more profitable than it actually is." The implications hit Sarah like cold water. "So when he told the divorce court his company was worth $15 million? He was lying under oath. The actual value is probably closer to $3 million, and that's being generous." Sarah stared at the documents, her mind racing. But how could he hide something like that from his own attorneys? He didn't hide it from his attorneys. Marcus Webb's firm specializes in protecting clients who have complex financial situations. They know exactly what Derek's real financial position is. Riley clicked to another file. "But here's the really interesting part. Sarah, while I was investigating Derek's company, I kept wondering why someone from your background would end up in such a vulnerable position." "What do you mean, my background?" "Sarah, honey, I remember where you worked before you married Derek. Goldman Sachs doesn't hire just anyone for their investment banking division. I remember you mentioning your family was in manufacturing." Riley paused, studying her friend's face. "So I did some research on Carter Steel Industries." Sarah felt her blood pressure spike. "Sarah, why didn't you ever mention that your family owns one of America's largest steel companies?" The secret Sarah had kept for 5 years hung in the air between them. "Because I wanted to be loved for myself, not for my family's money," Sarah said quietly. Riley stared at her for a long moment. "Sarah, Carter Steel Industries had revenues of $2.8 billion last year. Your grandmother, Helen Carter, is one of the most powerful women in American manufacturing." "I know who my grandmother is." "Riley, do you because I'm looking at articles about the Carter family legacy. And you're listed as Helen Carter's only heir. Sarah, you're not just rich, you're dynasty rich." Sarah felt tears threatening. "I ran away from all that when I was 27. I wanted to prove I could build a life on my own merit, find someone who loved me for who I was, not what I represented. And instead, you found Derek Reynolds." "Instead, I found Derek Reynolds," Sarah confirmed. Riley was quiet for several minutes. processing the magnitude of Sarah's revelation. Sarah, do you understand what this means? Derek served divorce papers to the heir of a $2.8 billion empire while she was pregnant with his child. He committed perjury in divorce proceedings while lying about his own company's value. And he did all of this while having an affair funded by fraudulent business expenses. Sarah looked at her friend, seeing something she hadn't seen in weeks. Hope. Riley, I haven't spoken to my grandmother in 5 years. I changed my phone number, returned her letters unopened, refused all contact with the family business. But you could call her now? I could call her now. Sarah, what if Derek's biggest mistake wasn't serving you divorce papers? What if his biggest mistake was underestimating who he was really divorcing? That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment holding her phone, staring at the number she had memorized but never dialed during her marriage. Outside her window, Austin's skyline twinkled with the lights of ambition and opportunity. Somewhere in that landscape, Derek Reynolds was probably celebrating his engagement to Madison Blake, confident that he had successfully upgraded his life and eliminated any obstacles to his future success. He had no idea that the woman he had discarded was about to make a phone call that would change everything. Sarah dialed her grandmother's direct line. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Helen Carter. Grandmother, Sarah said quietly. It's Sarah. I think I need to come home. The silence that followed was filled with 5 years of hurt, pride, and love that had never really disappeared. Sarah Catherine Carter. Helen's voice was strong, commanding, but Sarah could hear the emotion underneath. It's about time. I know it has been. I know I hurt you by leaving. You hurt me by disappearing, Helen corrected. Helen, but I always knew you'd come back when you were ready. What happened? Sweetheart. Sarah took a deep breath, one hand resting on her pregnant belly. I think I married the wrong man, grandmother, and I think he just made the biggest mistake of his life. Helen Carter's private jet touched down at Austin Bergstrom International Airport 18 hours after Sarah's phone call. Sarah waited in the VIP lounge, wearing one of her few remaining designer dresses from her Wall Street days, trying to prepare herself for a conversation she had been avoiding for 5 years. When Helen walked through the door, Sarah was struck by how little her grandmother had changed. At 68, Helen still carried herself with the commanding presence that had made her the first woman to successfully run a major American steel company. Her silver hair was pulled back in an elegant chignon, and she wore a charcoal wool suit that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly rent. Sarah, Helen said simply, pulling her granddaughter into a fierce embrace. You look tired. I am tired. Grandmother, tired of pretending to be someone I'm not. They drove to Sarah's apartment in Helen's rental car, a modest sedan that Helen had specifically chosen to avoid drawing attention. Tell me about Derek Reynolds, Helen said as they sat in Sarah's small living room. Sarah explained everything, the affair, the divorce proceedings, the systematic destruction of her reputation, the financial manipulations, Derek's lies about his company's value. Helen listened without interruption, her expression growing colder with each detail. And you never told him about Carter Steel? Helen asked. I told him my family was in manufacturing, that we were estranged, that I didn't want to discuss it. He never pushed for details. Of course he didn't. Men like Derek Reynolds don't investigate backgrounds when they think they're getting a bargain. Helen's voice carried decades of experience dealing with predatory businessmen. Sarah, why did you run away from us? Sarah felt tears threatening. Because I was 27 and exhausted from being Helen Carter's granddaughter. I was tired of people changing when they learned my last name. I wanted to prove I could build something real on my own. And did you build something real? Sarah looked around her modest apartment, then down at her pregnant belly. I thought I did. I thought Derek loved me for myself. Men like Derek Reynolds don't love, sweetheart. They acquire, they calculate, they upgrade when better options become available. Helen reached for Sarah's hand. The question is, what do you want to do about it? I want my daughter to be proud of her mother. I want Derek to understand that actions have consequences. And I want to stop being afraid of who I really am. Helen smiled for the first time since arriving. Good. Then let's remind Mr. Reynolds exactly who he decided to divorce. Over the next 2 hours, Helen explained how Carter Steel had evolved during Sarah's 5-year absence. The company had expanded internationally, acquired 3 smaller manufacturing firms, and diversified into renewable energy infrastructure. We're not just making steel anymore. Sarah, we're building the framework for America's energy future. Solar panel mounting systems, wind turbine components, electric vehicle charging infrastructure. That's incredible. Grandmother, it's strategic, and it's what you'll be inheriting when I retire in 5 years. Sarah felt the weight of that legacy settling around her shoulders. I'm not sure I'm ready for that responsibility. Nobody ever feels ready for the responsibility they're born to handle, but you have the intelligence, the education, and now the life experience to understand what real leadership requires. Helen opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Sarah, I need to tell you something that might change your perspective on your husband's divorce filing. What do you mean? Carter Steel has been quietly monitoring Austin's tech sector for potential acquisitions and partnerships, clean technology companies that align with our renewable energy initiatives. Sarah felt her stomach drop. You've been watching Derek's company. We've been watching several local companies, including Reynolds Digital. We were particularly interested because their software applications for energy grid management could complement our infrastructure projects. Grandmother, what did you find? Helen's expression was grim. We found that Derek Reynolds has been systematically defrauding his investors. Inflated revenue reports, falsified client contracts, creative bookkeeping that borders on criminal fraud. Riley discovered the same thing. Your friend Riley Chen is very good at her job. We've been considering hiring her firm for future investigations. Sarah stared at her grandmother. How long have you known about Derek's financial problems? 6 months. Long enough to determine that Reynolds Digital would be a liability rather than an asset for any legitimate business partnership. And you didn't warn me. Helen's voice was gentle but firm. Sarah, you made it very clear 5 years ago that you wanted nothing to do with Carter Steel or my involvement in your life. I respected your wishes, even when it meant watching you marry someone I knew was dangerous. Dangerous, how? Men who build their success on lies and manipulation don't suddenly become honest in their personal relationships. Derek Reynolds showed me exactly who he was in business. I hoped I was wrong about what that meant for you personally. Sarah felt the pieces clicking together. So when Derek filed for divorce, he made himself vulnerable to the kind of investigation that could destroy everything he's built. And more importantly, he gave you a reason to come home. You think he made a mistake? Helen's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Sarah, Derek Reynolds thinks he's divorcing a helpless pregnant woman with no resources and no options. He has no idea he just declared war on a family that's been winning battles since before his great-grandfather was born. That night, Sarah sat in her apartment reviewing financial documents her grandmother had left with her. Carter Steel's annual revenue was larger than the GDP of some small countries. The family's investment portfolio included stakes in everything from technology companies to real estate developments across 3 continents. She thought about Derek's casual dismissal of her contributions to their marriage, his assumption that she brought nothing valuable to their partnership. He had been right about one thing. Sarah Carter Reynolds had contributed very little to their relationship, but Sarah Catherine Carter was about to contribute something Derek had never anticipated. She was about to contribute consequences. The war room Helen established in Sarah's apartment would have impressed military strategists. Within 48 hours, Carter Steele's legal team, private investigators, and financial analysts had transformed Sarah's modest living space into a command center. David Park, Carter Steele's head of legal affairs, spread documents across Sarah's dining table. We've completed our analysis of Reynolds Digital's financial statements. The fraud is extensive and well documented. Riley Chen sat beside him, having been officially hired by Carter Steele 12 hours earlier. I've traced at least $200,000 in company funds that Derek used for personal expenses. The Madison-Blake relationship was funded entirely by Reynolds Digital's marketing budget. How? Sarah asked. Hotel rooms listed as client meetings, restaurant charges classified as business entertainment, jewelry purchases written off as corporate gifts that were never given to actual clients. Riley's voice was clinical, professional. Derek's been treating his company like a personal bank account. Helen reviewed the documents with satisfaction. David, what's our timeline for action? We can file fraud complaints with the SEC and the IRS immediately. The evidence is overwhelming. Derek will face federal investigation within weeks. And the divorce proceedings. Sarah's prenuptial agreement is invalid. She signed it as Sarah Carter, private citizen with modest assets. She never agreed to anything as Sarah Carter, heir to a multi-billion-dollar fortune. Sarah felt a flutter of hope. What does that mean practically? It means Derek's legal strategy was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of who he was divorcing. David replied, we can challenge the entire divorce settlement and demand full disclosure of his actual financial position. But more importantly, Helen added, we can offer Derek a choice. What kind of choice? Helen's smile was predatory. The kind that gives him an opportunity to exit gracefully, or the kind that destroys everything he's built. The next morning, Derek received a hand-delivered letter at Reynolds Digital's headquarters. Sarah watched from her car across the street as he read the document, his face going progressively paler. The letter was simple and devastating. Mr. Reynolds, Carter Steel Industries has completed a comprehensive analysis of Reynolds Digital's financial practices. We have documented evidence of securities fraud, tax evasion, and misappropriation of investor funds. We are prepared to forward this evidence to appropriate federal agencies unless you agree to the following terms. 1. Immediate renegotiation of all divorce proceedings with full disclosure of your actual financial position. 2. Public acknowledgement of your fraudulent business practices. 3. Resignation from Reynolds Digital with transfer of all assets to a court-appointed trustee. 4. Complete cooperation with ongoing investigations. You have 48 hours to respond. Sincerely, Helen Carter, Chief Executive Officer, Carter Steel Industries. Sarah's phone rang 30 minutes later. Sarah, what the hell is going on? Derek's voice was panicked, desperate. Who is Carter Steel Industries, and why are they threatening me? They're my family's company. Derek, your family doesn't have a company. Your family works in manufacturing. Carter Steel Industries is manufacturing. Derek, we make steel, $2.8 billion worth of steel annually. The silence stretched for nearly a minute. That's impossible. Is it you never asked about my background beyond what I volunteered? You never wondered why someone with an MBA from Wharton was content to work part-time at an art gallery? You never questioned why I wasn't impressed by your $15 million company? Sarah, you lied to me. I omitted information. There's a difference. I told you my family was in business. that we were estranged, that I didn't want to discuss it. You assumed that meant we were middle class and irrelevant. This is insane. You can't just suddenly claim to be rich. I'm not claiming anything. Derek, I'm stating facts. Facts that your attorneys will be verifying very shortly. Derek's voice cracked. Sarah, please. We can work this out. We can renegotiate the divorce terms. I'll be fair. Fair would have been not serving me divorce papers while I was pregnant with your child. Fair would have been not lying about your company's finances. Fair would have been not funding your affair with embezzled money. I never embezzled anything. Derek, we have documentation of every fraudulent expense, every inflated revenue report, every lie you told to investors. You used company credit cards to pay for hotel rooms with Madison Blake. You wrote off her jewelry as business expenses. You've been systematically defrauding everyone who trusted you. Another long silence. What do you want from me? I want you to face the consequences of your choices. You decided I wasn't worth your honesty, your fidelity, or your respect. Now you get to discover what happens when someone with real power decides you're not worth their mercy. That afternoon, Madison Blake arrived at Sarah's apartment uninvited. Sarah answered the door to find the influencer looking significantly less polished than her social media presence suggested. We need to talk, Madison said without preamble. I don't think we have anything to discuss. We have Derek Reynolds to discuss. Sarah reluctantly let her in. Madison sat on the edge of the couch, her usual confidence replaced by something approaching desperation. Sarah, I know you hate me, and I understand why, but I need you to know that Derek lied to me too. How did Derek lie to you? He told me you were emotionally abusive. He said you were controlling, that you threatened to destroy his business if he left you. He made me believe I was rescuing him from a toxic marriage. Sarah studied Madison's face, seeing genuine distress there. And now I've seen the financial documents his attorneys showed him today. Now I know his company is basically worthless. Now I know he's been funding our relationship with stolen money. So you're here to what? Apologize. Madison's composure cracked. I'm here to ask for your help. My help with what? Sarah, I grew up in foster care. I've worked for 7 years to build my social media following, my brand, my career. Derek promised me we'd be a power couple, that his business success would elevate my opportunities. And instead I'm about to be known as the woman who destroyed a pregnant billionaire's marriage for a man who turned out to be a fraud. Madison's voice was barely above a whisper. My agent already dropped me. 3 brand partnerships canceled their contracts this morning. I'm being crucified online. Sarah felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. Madison, I didn't create this situation. I know you didn't. Derek created it. Derek lied to both of us, just in different ways. Madison met Sarah's eyes. But you have the power to control how this story ends. What do you mean? You could destroy Derek completely. You have the resources and the evidence. But destroying Derek destroys me too. And I'm not the one who cheated on a pregnant wife. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. What are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to let me help you expose Derek's fraud while protecting my own reputation. I have recordings, text messages, evidence of how he manipulated both of us. Sarah stared at the woman who had been sleeping with her husband, seeing not a rival, but another victim of Derek's calculations. Madison, if I help you, what happens to Derek? Derek gets exactly what he deserves. Justice instead of revenge. That evening, Sarah called her grandmother with a proposal that would change everything. The press conference took place at Carter Steele's Austin regional office, a gleaming building Sarah had never seen before her grandmother's arrival. Helen had purchased the property 6 months earlier as part of the company's Texas expansion. though Sarah suspected the timing wasn't coincidental. The conference room was packed with reporters, financial analysts, and representatives from the Securities Exchange Commission who had been investigating Derek's company since receiving Carter Steele's evidence. Sarah sat at the head table between her grandmother and David Park, wearing a navy blue suit that Helen had somehow procured overnight. For the first time in months, she felt like herself, not the diminished version she had become during her marriage, but the sharp, intelligent woman who had once commanded respect on Wall Street. Madison Blake sat in the front row, having cooperated fully with investigators in exchange for immunity from prosecution. Her social media accounts had gone dark for the past week, but her attorney had assured reporters she would be making a statement. Derek was notably absent. His attorneys had advised him not to appear publicly while under federal investigation. Helen opened the conference with characteristic directness. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're here today to discuss fraudulent business practices that have affected multiple investors and violated federal securities laws. Carter Steel Industries conducted an investigation of Reynolds Digital as part of our due diligence for potential business partnerships. What we discovered was systematic fraud spanning 3 years." David Park presented the evidence methodically. Falsified revenue reports, inflated client contracts, misappropriated funds. The pattern of deception was overwhelming and undeniable. Mr. Reynolds used investor capital and company resources to fund personal expenses, including an extramarital affair that he concealed from his wife, business partners, and shareholders. David continued, "The actual value of Reynolds Digital is approximately 15% of what Mr. Reynolds claimed in investor presentations." When the floor opened for questions, a reporter from the Austin Business Journal asked the obvious question, "Ms. Carter, you were married to Derek Reynolds during the period when this fraud occurred. Were you aware of your husband's illegal activities?" Sarah leaned toward the microphone, her voice steady and clear. "I was not aware of my husband's business fraud, though I was certainly aware of his personal fraud. Derek Reynolds served me with divorce papers 7 months into my pregnancy while conducting an affair funded by embezzled money. He told divorce courts that his company was worth $15 million, while knowing the actual value was a fraction of that amount. Were you aware that your family's company was investigating your husband's business?" "No. I had been estranged from my family for 5 years. I only learned about Carter Steele's investigation after Derek filed for divorce, and I reconnected with my grandmother." Another reporter pressed further. "Ms. Carter, there are reports that you concealed your family's wealth during your marriage. Isn't that a form of deception as well?" Sarah had prepared for this question. "I never lied about my background. I told Derek my family was in manufacturing and that we were estranged. He never asked for specifics, and I wasn't required to provide them. Unlike my husband, I didn't commit federal crimes or violate anyone's trust." "What's your response to claims that you're using your family's resources to seek revenge against your ex-husband?" "Revenge would be using my family's influence to destroy Derek personally while ignoring his crimes. Justice is ensuring that fraud victims are compensated and that Derek faces appropriate legal consequences for his actions." Madison Blake's statement was brief but devastating. She confirmed that Derek had funded their relationship with company money, admitted that he had lied to her about Sarah's behavior, and provided recordings of Derek discussing ways to hide his financial problems from investors. "Derek Reynolds manipulated multiple women to serve his personal agenda," Madison said. "I deeply regret my role in his deception, but I refuse to be silent while he escapes accountability." The afternoon brought swift consequences. The SEC announced formal charges against Derek Reynolds for securities fraud. The IRS opened an investigation into tax evasion. Reynolds Digital's board of directors called for Derek's immediate resignation. By evening, Derek's assets were frozen pending the federal investigation. His engagement to Madison Blake was officially ended. The company he had spent 15 years building was placed under court supervision. Sarah returned to her apartment to find Derek waiting in the parking lot. He looked like he had aged 10 years in the past week, his usual confidence replaced by desperate exhaustion. "Sarah, please, we need to talk." "We have nothing to discuss. Derek, your attorneys can contact my attorneys." "Sarah, I know I made mistakes, but destroying me won't bring our marriage back. It won't change what happened between us." Sarah turned to face him fully. "Derek, I'm not destroying you. I'm simply refusing to protect you from the consequences of your own choices. You could have warned me. You could have told me who your family was, what resources you had access to. We could have worked something out. Could we? You served me divorce papers while I was pregnant with your child. You stole money to fund an affair. You lied to investors, to me, to everyone who trusted you. What exactly would we have worked out?" Derek's composure cracked completely. "I loved you, Sarah. I really did love you." "No, Derek. You loved the idea of me. You loved having a wife who made you feel successful and important. You loved that I was attractive enough to reflect well on you, but not ambitious enough to threaten you. You never loved me enough to be honest with me. And now you get to learn what it feels like to face the world without any protection from the consequences of your choices. The same thing you expected me to do when you decided our marriage was over." As Derek drove away, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years, complete clarity about who she was and what she was capable of achieving. Her phone buzzed with a text from Helen. "Proud of you, sweetheart. Come home when you're ready." Sarah looked around the parking lot of her modest apartment complex, then at the skyline of Austin where Derek's empire was crumbling in real time. She was ready to go home. She was ready to reclaim not just her family legacy, but her own sense of power and purpose. Derek Reynolds had thought he was divorcing a nobody. Instead, he had awakened a dynasty, and Sarah Catherine Carter was just getting started. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the boardroom of Carter Steel Industries headquarters in Pittsburgh, addressing senior executives about the company's expansion into renewable energy infrastructure. Her daughter Emma, now 2 months old, slept peacefully in a bassinet beside her chair, occasionally making small sounds that caused hardened business executives to smile with unexpected tenderness. The Austin facility will focus specifically on solar panel mounting systems and electric vehicle charging infrastructure, Sarah explained, pointing to architectural renderings on the presentation screen. "We're projecting $200 million in additional revenue within the first year." Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see Pittsburgh's skyline, a city forever changed, but still fundamentally the place that had forged American industry. The Carter Steel building occupied 4 city blocks, a testament to 5 generations of family determination and vision. Helen Carter sat at the head of the conference table, her expression radiating pride and satisfaction. At 68, she had successfully positioned the company for the next century while preparing her granddaughter to inherit a legacy stronger than ever. "Questions?" Sarah asked the room. Marcus Webb, the company's new head of legal affairs, poached from his previous firm after his excellent work on Derek's case, raised his hand. "Sarah, what's our timeline for the Austin facility groundbreaking?" 6 weeks. I'll be relocating there temporarily to oversee construction and hiring. Emma and I will be splitting time between Texas and Pennsylvania until the facility is operational." After the meeting, Sarah walked to her office, the same space that had once belonged to her grandfather. She had redecorated minimally, adding only photos of Emma and a small painting Derek had once criticized as too abstract for a living room. Riley Chen knocked on her open door. "Got a minute?" Sarah's former private investigator was now Carter Steele's head of corporate security, a role that combined her investigative skills with her understanding of modern business threats. "What's the latest on Derek?" Sarah asked. "Sentence this morning. 2 years minimum security, 3 years probation, full restitution to defrauded investors." Riley settled into one of the leather chairs facing Sarah's desk. "He'll serve 18 months if he maintains good behavior." "And Reynolds Digital, sold at auction to cover investor damages. The new owners are keeping about half the original staff, implementing proper financial controls, focusing on legitimate business development." Sarah nodded, feeling neither satisfaction nor regret. Derek's consequences were appropriate to his choices. Nothing more or less than justice required. "What about Madison?" Riley smiled. "Actually doing quite well. Her podcast about surviving manipulative relationships has 2 million downloads. She's got a book deal and a partnership with a nonprofit that supports women escaping financial abuse. Good for her. She asked me to tell you something, actually. She said to say thank you for showing her that revenge and justice aren't the same thing." That evening, Sarah sat in her grandmother's study, reviewing quarterly reports, while Emma napped in her lap. The room was exactly as she remembered from childhood: mahogany shelves lined with first editions, family photographs spanning 6 generations, oil paintings of Carter patriarchs who had built their fortune through intelligence and determination. "Sarah," Helen said from the doorway, "you have a visitor." Sarah looked up to see a familiar figure, David Chen, Riley's older brother, whom she had dated briefly during her Wall Street days. He stood in the doorway, wearing a well-tailored suit and the confident smile she remembered. "David, what a surprise!" "I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I was in Pittsburgh for business and heard through Riley that you were back home." David had built his own investment firm in New York, specializing in sustainable technology funds. He was exactly the kind of man Sarah's grandmother would approve of, successful in his own right, from a good family, ambitious, but not ruthlessly so. "Of course not. Please, come in." They talked for an hour about business, about Pittsburgh's transformation, about the challenges of balancing family legacy with personal identity. David was charming, intelligent, and clearly interested in rekindling their relationship. When he asked if she would have dinner with him the next time she was in New York, Sarah found herself hesitating. "David, I appreciate the invitation, but I need to be honest with you. I just finalized a divorce 6 months ago. I have a newborn daughter. I'm still figuring out who I am after years of trying to be someone else." "I understand completely. But Sarah, I knew who you were before you married Derek Reynolds. I knew the brilliant woman who could analyze market trends faster than computers, who had opinions about everything and wasn't afraid to share them. That woman was extraordinary." After David left, Sarah walked to the window overlooking Pittsburgh's 3 rivers. The city lights reflected on the water like scattered diamonds, beautiful but distant. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Sarah, I know I have no right to contact you, but I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. Not sorry that you exposed my crimes. I deserved that. Sorry that I was too selfish and stupid to see what I had when I had it. Our daughter is lucky to have you as her mother. Derek." Sarah read the message twice, then deleted it without responding. Some apologies, she had learned, were about the person offering them rather than the person receiving them. Derek's regret was real, but it was also irrelevant to her future. She looked down at Emma, sleeping peacefully despite the weight of conversation around her, and felt a profound sense of completion. Your mommy spent 3 years trying to be smaller, quieter, less threatening, she whispered to her daughter. I thought that would make me more lovable. Instead, it just made me invisible. Real love doesn't ask you to diminish yourself. It challenges you to become who you're meant to be. Emma stirred slightly, as if agreeing with her mother's wisdom. Outside the study windows, Pittsburgh's skyline stretched toward the horizon, a city built on steel and determination and the understanding that true power comes not from taking what others have built, but from building something that lasts. Sarah Catherine Carter had come home to herself, and she was just getting started. 1 year later, Sarah stood on the construction site of Carter Steel's new Austin facility, hard hat protecting her auburn hair as she surveyed the progress. The renewable energy manufacturing plant was ahead of schedule and under budget, employing 300 local workers in jobs that paid living wages with full benefits. Emma toddled between the construction barriers, her tiny hard hat a gift from the crew foreman who had become completely enchanted with the boss's daughter. At 14 months old, Emma showed signs of inheriting both her mother's intelligence and her great-grandmother's determination. Mrs. Carter, the project manager, approached with the weekly progress report. "We're ready for the ribbon-cutting ceremony next month. Local news wants to interview you about bringing industrial jobs back to Texas." Sarah reviewed the timeline, noting that they had achieved every milestone Helen had projected when they first discussed the expansion. The Austin facility would produce mounting systems for solar installations across the Southwest, creating jobs while advancing America's renewable energy infrastructure. "Schedule the interviews for the morning of the ceremony," Sarah replied. "I want to make sure we're highlighting our workers' achievements, not just corporate success." Her phone rang with a familiar number. Helen calling from Pittsburgh. "How's my great-granddaughter?" Helen asked immediately. "Currently trying to convince the construction crew to let her operate the crane," Sarah replied, watching Emma gesture enthusiastically at the massive equipment. "Smart girl. She understands that power comes from knowing how things work, not just owning them." Grandmother. "I've been thinking about our conversation last month, about when you plan to retire. And I think I'm ready. Not ready to take over tomorrow, but ready to start the formal transition process." Helen's silence was filled with emotion. "Sarah, are you sure running Carter Steel means sacrificing certain kinds of personal freedom? It means being responsible for 40,000 employees and their families. It means making decisions that affect entire communities." "I know what it means. I also know that power without responsibility is just privilege, and responsibility without power is just burden. I want both, grandmother. I want to build something that matters." "Then we'll begin the transition planning immediately. 3 years should be sufficient for you to assume full control." That evening, Sarah sat in her Austin apartment, a spacious place in a complex she had purchased and renovated to provide affordable housing for young professionals. Emma was finally asleep after an energetic day at the construction site, and Sarah was reviewing proposals for Carter Steel's next expansion. Her doorbell rang, and she opened it to find Riley Chen holding Chinese takeout and wearing the expression of someone with interesting news. "I come bearing food and gossip," Riley announced, settling onto Sarah's couch. "Guess who I ran into at the grocery store today?" "No idea." "Derek Reynolds." Sarah felt a minor flutter of old emotions, but nothing approaching the devastation she once would have experienced at his name. "How is he?" "Surprisingly well, actually. He got out of minimum security 3 months ago, started a consulting firm that helps small businesses implement proper financial controls. Apparently, he's good at teaching entrepreneurs how to avoid the mistakes he made." "That's appropriate." "He asked about you and Emma. I told him you were building an empire and raising a daughter who will probably run the world someday." Sarah smiled at that description. "What did he say?" "He said he was glad you found your way back to who you were meant to be. Then he said something interesting." "What?" "He said marrying you was the best thing that ever happened to him, and divorcing you was the best thing that ever happened to you." Sarah considered that statement, finding it surprisingly insightful. Derek's betrayal had forced her to rediscover her own strength, to reconnect with her family, to stop hiding from her own potential. "Riley, do you think I would have come home eventually, even if Derek hadn't cheated?" Riley was quiet for a moment. "Honestly, I think you were too comfortable being smaller than you really were. Sometimes it takes someone treating us as disposable to remind us that we're actually irreplaceable." Later that night, Sarah sat on her balcony overlooking Austin's skyline, Emma sleeping in her arms, thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment. 2 years ago, she had been Sarah Reynolds, a woman trying to disappear into someone else's definition of appropriate. She had given up her career, her family connections, her own identity to prove that love was more important than power. Now she was Sarah Catherine Carter again, heir to an industrial dynasty, mother to a daughter who would inherit even more than she had, and architect of her own extraordinary life. Her phone buzzed with a text from David Chen. "Saw the news about the Austin facility. Impressive work. Still hoping you'll let me take you to dinner next time you're in New York." Sarah smiled as she typed her response. "I'd like that. But fair warning, I'm not the woman who's going to make herself smaller to fit into anyone's vision of appropriate. I'm building something that will last for generations." His reply came immediately. "I wouldn't want you any other way." Sarah looked out at Austin's lights, then down at Emma, who was stirring slightly in her sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new decisions that would affect thousands of people's lives. But tonight, for the first time in years, Sarah Carter felt completely at peace with who she was and what she was building. Derek Reynolds had thought he was divorcing a nobody. Instead, he had awakened a dynasty. And Sarah Catherine Carter was just getting started. The steel industry that had built America's infrastructure was now building America's energy future, one solar panel mount and wind turbine component at a time. The Carter family legacy would continue for another generation, stronger and more purposeful than ever. Some stories end with revenge, others end with justice. The best ones end with transformation. Sarah Carter's story was just beginning.